Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to episode 2 of Creation Biology. This is all new material. We covered in the last episode a paper by Chad Arment in the Creation Research Journal. Today we're going to be covering two papers, one by Michael Oard in the Journal of Creation, and one a secular paper, and I say paper loosely, it was a conference poster. I haven't been able to figure out exactly where, but it's clearly written up as a conference poster. And on migration of animals across waterways. Now, this is something that I was asked to discuss by a friend of mine. I won't say his name because he doesn't give me permission to say so. But I was asked to look into by a friend of mine, so I did a little bit of digging into this. And I'm still hoping to get one further paper that the conference abstract is based on. But we're going to talk about it. The title of the abstract is Stegodon SCA Crossing. Swim, Shrink, and Disperse. It was published in Senckenberg World of Biodiversity. It's clearly a poster for a conference. And I'll try and put some screenshots from this up on screen as we discuss this. But basically, the model we're looking at here is they're looking at stegodons, which are extinct forms of elephants in the Southeast Asian islands of Indonesia, Philippines, etc. And they're looking at how they could have arrived at the locations in which they once lived, because they don't live there currently, but they are found only in those places, and they're trying to figure out how they got there. All right, this is a group that is found in Pliocene and Pleistocene strata, as well as late Miocene. So there is some crossover between the post-flood boundary if you pick it up at the higher area. And again, I don't want to get into that, but we did mention it in the last episode, so I thought I'd just bring it up again. Now, the continental form of stegodon is estimated to be about 3,600 kilograms, maybe 3,700. And according to the model that they've put together, the stegodon could have swum 174 kilometers. Well, 107 kilometers to miles, because we're dealing with American measurements here. 174 kilometers is about 108 miles. That's a lot of swimming, right? So just as a thought experiment, the Aleutian Islands are very, very close to Russia. The distance between the two is not very long at all. It's only 3 miles. Between the difference between Alaska and Russia is just 3 miles. It's not very much at all. Now, the narrowest point of the Bering Strait is 55 miles. But there are islands in the middle of the strait which make it a mere 3 miles apart. So elephants could easily have swum that distance, according to this model. I'm assuming we're assuming that stegodons are elephants. That's where they're classified, stegodons. They're classified in order Proboscidae, which would make them part of the elephant kind. So, assuming, of course, that they are members of the elephant kind, that means that it would be quite easy for elephants, which are very large animals, to disperse long distances. Now, this is, of course, a model. They've done a model here. This is not necessarily something that is a guarantee, but the estimates of crossing success from this model are in the 60 to 65% range, even for animals that have undergone insular dwarfism and shrunk down to a mere 920 kilograms, which is about 25% of the mass of the normal estimated size of stegodon. So what that means, in effect, based on this model, is that crossing large oceanic distances for large animals is not a problem, according to the evolutionists themselves. Now that leads us to Michael Oard's paper in the Journal of Creation. Oard's paper This was published in a 2022 edition of the Journal of Creation. The title of the paper is "When and How Did Marsupials Migrate to Australia?" It's trying to answer a similar question. How do we get organisms isolated, only end up with marsupials in Australia? Why do we mostly only have marsupials in Australia? Now, he does point out that the evolutionists have the same problem that the creationists do in this regard, because they don't believe that marsupials arrived in Australia until after plate tectonic motion had occurred, which split Australia from the Southeast Asian islands. So they've got the same problem we do. So anytime you hear an evolutionist say that, well, how did marsupials get to Australia, just flip the question back at them. They won't be able to answer it. The key point to take away is he puts out 5 possibilities for organisms to get from various from one place to another across water. And the 5 possibilities he puts forward are a previously existing land bridge, which we think there was one in the Bering Strait a long time ago. The water there's not terribly deep in some places. Island hopping, which is the ability to swim between nearby islands. Log mats, which the evolutionists themselves have appealed to. Human transport, and God's direction. Now, of these 5, for the marsupials and probably for other large dispersing organisms, human transport is probably unlikely. It's unlikely that humans would have transported marsupials. It's unlikely that humans would have transported large ground sloths, which we find in South America, but nowhere else. It's unlikely that we would find other organisms that are not really useful to humans, but we find isolated in only certain places. It's unlikely that humans would have transported those. So we can probably dispense with that. In terms of a land bridge, it is conceivable that in the marsupial case, there may have been some land bridges. According to Oard's model of the flood, that there would have been a significantly lower sea level during the Ice Age period, and that would have dropped the sea level by 165 feet, which would have created a partial but not complete land bridge from Southeast Asia to Australia, which means that they would have had to get there by other means. Again, this leads to island hopping and to the log mats. Oard's preferred solution is log mats. And to a certain extent, I would agree. I think that there is some validity to this. I think that Oard is onto something when he says that log mats were the way to go. Log mats were the way that these organisms dispersed for smaller organisms. And Oard gives examples of things like snakes, small mammals, lizards, frogs, etc. in his paper. So, again, I think that there is some possibility of this here. I think Oard is onto something, and I do think the log mats do count for dispersal. However, this is where the fun starts. For large animals, like stegodon, for example, or the giant ground sloths that we find in South America. And again, I don't know, based on flood models, some of this may not need to be explained. But just assuming we do need to explain it, I'm not sure that log mats are the way to go. Now, Oard in his paper kind of poo-poos the idea that organisms could have swum between islands. At least larger organisms could have done so. He kind of poo-poos. He only spends a couple of sentences on it, not very much. I like Mike Oard, so don't take this as any kind of criticism of Mike Oard. But based on the model that the evolutionists themselves have presented, which you saw on screen hopefully a little while ago, I'm not so sure that swimming is ruled out. Oard gives the example he doesn't think that sloths could have done swimming. Sloths are actually quite good swimmers. They're better. They move faster in water than they do on land, so I don't think that sloths swimming across certain island barriers is going to be a problem. I also don't think that other large animals like that are comfortable in water, like elephants or hippopotami, would have struggled to swim between islands. And of course, birds we don't have a problem because they can fly. But I think that Ord's probably right in terms of preferring log mats as an example when we're talking about smaller organisms. But larger organisms, I'm not sure they would manage on the log mats. Particularly large mammals like stegodon, for example, other large elephants, hippopotami, rhinoceroses, large giant ground sloths, large cats, etc. I think that there is potential for issues here. Now, I don't think that the jaguar's dispersal to Central and South America, along with the puma, is going to be that much of a problem for... I think the puma probably could have made it on a log mat. The jaguar may not have been able to, but jaguars don't mind the water. They're one of the few cats that don't mind the water very much. So, jaguars swimming across the Bering Strait, where it's only a couple miles, this is conceivable, right? We don't know how long they can swim. I don't know that off the top of my head, but it's conceivable. All right. Now, again, my point here is, again, not to criticize Oard. I think Oard is debuting a useful biostratigraphic model here. I think that his explanation of how marsupials migrated to Australia is probably pretty close to the correct one. However, we don't just have the marsupials to Australia problem. We have other problems we need to explain, such as how we got giant ground sloths in South America, or how we got other large animals into South America. I'm not sure how well llamas would do, for example, or there's another type of South American animal that is in the llama family, the camelid family, would have gotten to South America. It probably was only one species and diversified thereafter. But still, I'm not entirely sure how that would have worked. How did bison get to North America? All right, because those things are rather large. I don't know how well they would do on a floating log mat, even if it's a very thick floating log mat. And again, there's experiments that could be done to test this. Put together a thick floating log mat and put the equivalent weight of a bison on it and see what happens. So you could test this. It's something that can be tested. But I do think that the model that Oard puts forward as the floating log mat model could be expanded to include swimming creatures. Now, probably not for marsupials. Most marsupials don't swim particularly well, at least not that I'm aware of. There may be some that do. I'm not particularly aware of them. But I think it is conceivable that there could be some swimming for other organisms, not necessarily marsupials, but other organisms that we need to account for. I don't think we can just dismiss it out of hand as he does in his paper. All right, the stegodon model, I think, is very, very helpful in this way because it demonstrates even with a large organism like stegodon, the crossing percentage, according to the model, is about 65 to 70%, depending on the size of the animal and the conditions and the time of year. Now, a lot of assumptions obviously went into this model, and I'd like to see a little bit more from that model before I completely sign on to it. That said, I do think there is potential here for large organisms to do a little bit more than just island hop to nearby islands. I think we're going to be looking at potential long-distance swimming, and of course we know that bears, they don't mind swimming long distances. We know polar bears can swim extensive distances, and some of the other bears are quite fond of the water. So I don't think that swimming is out of the question for larger animals like bears, like elephants, like hippopotami that don't mind the water. All right, a little bit of a shorter episode today, but I wanted to get this out because it was somebody asked for it, and I will link to the poster and Oard's paper. Now, Oard's paper, I don't know if it's freely available online. It is part of the Journal of Creation. If you want a PDF of it, feel free to send me an email. I will be happy to provide you with a PDF of that issue of the Journal of Creation, and you are welcome to read Oard's article at that point. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. Hope to see you all in the next episode.